I've been in, kind of started in the whole instructional design back in 2015. I was a student and I got hired as a student worker in our ITRC, which is Instructional Technology Resource Center. And I've just loved and made this, part of just who I want to be as an instructional technologist. And so today I'm the creating an active learning environment with H5P. So if you haven't heard of H5P before, it stands for HTML5 package. And so here's some examples on the screen. Basically similar to Flash, it's another platform for you to create interactive content for your students mostly. And so they have different things, like we've got this one is a sequencing that's on the screen here. There's image pairing and multiple choice. So there's a lot of ranges of what H5P can do with its different content types. As a matter of fact, here are all the current H5P content types that are listed on their website that you can use to create your interactive content. I'll just showcase some of these as well, because a lot of this will be kind of showing you some of the content that's available and then using it, right? So we have the Agamotto. This one basically allows you to take images and layer them. So right now we're looking at a map of Europe, but then I can use the dial. Now I'm looking at the rivers in Europe, and then I can actually see the different countries in Europe. So that's one example for you. And so they go from really basic to things like that with the images, but then you can do things like the branching scenario. And this one's really cool because like this one, you can do a kind of like a video case study. And that's what this one is an example of. So basically you watch videos and then it will ask you questions, and based on how you answer the question, it will take you to another video of a different response, or it might tell you that, oh, that's not the correct response, try again. And that one takes a little bit of time to develop, again, because you're creating videos for this. But then they've got more of like a non-linear presentation. So here's one that's art in Europe. So you can go through the presentation, answer the questions, and then it actually tells me, okay, which art period do you want to look at? So I can look at modern, I can read through it. When I get done, okay, choose the next one. And then it's going to let me know how much I've completed. So that one is another way to do the branching scenario that maybe take less planning. And here are some of the benefits that I want to highlight as we're talking about H5P. So H5P itself, it's content that's reusable, shareable, and free. It's an open platform. So anyone can use H5P. It is a fun creating content in my opinion. Basically, it's kind of form, and then you fill in that form with information, right? So if you're doing Agamotto, that's going to be different than the branching scenario, but anyone can create this content. You're also taking ownership of this because you're designing, and this kind of goes into that next point of you're creating this content for you, and you're taking ownership of what you're creating for your students. And so you have a lot more control in that sense. So those are just some of the benefits that I found with using H5P. And typically when I go to conferences and we are talking about H5P, it's usually from the point of view of this is the instructor and they are producing this content for their students. And so here's kind of an example of what that might look like. At ISU, we use Moodle as our learning management system. And so here's the Moodle book. So this just allows me to create my content, and then I can put interactive content in there for the users to interact with. Here's another one about copyright terminology, and so that they can, match the word to the correct, and then they can check their understanding and see how they do that way. And so in Moodle's context, this is done with the the content bank. And so if I go here into Moodle, and I'll probably go back to this a few different times, but there's the content bank, and I'm able to store my H5P on my Moodle and then embed it into different courses or into different activities. Anywhere that there's the HTML editor, I'm able to do that. But I want to take it to the next step and really think about having students be a part of the learning process, having students publish H5P, because as you noticed in the previous slide, it was that one direction. The teacher creates the content, the students absorb it. But with H5P, we're able to give students the ability to create H5P and share it. So there's kind of this thing that I like to think about is that, they're learning, creating, and sharing about what they're doing. And here's what that might look like. So again, in the Moodle course, so we're using the discussion form. And what you might do is put a prompt, have students be assigned to a specific topic, depending on what it is, what the outcome is you want to accomplish. But then we're able to give the students the H5P roles that they need in Moodle to use it. So you might have an example like this, where the student puts together a post, and then they also include their H5P activity in that discussion form. And then you have students who can go to the point of commenting, letting them know what they thought about it, just have a discussion, right? And then Moodle also has other features. So if I wanted, I could put them in groups, and I could give them the role of a grader. So then they could actually rate each other's work based on, if there's a rubric or some sort of criteria type thing. So it's the students getting involved in this process of both learning and evaluating one another is kind of the premise. And so I kind of want to spend, because with H5P, there's a lot of different strategies depending on what you have available to you. And I wanted to really discuss about some of those different areas. So right now we're going to talk about getting started. So brand new to H5P, you can go to h5p.org and create a free account. It's a good place for you to get started as far as, looking at the various content types. For a time, a lot of people use that as a place to create their content and then host it or embed it into other sites. But more and more, h5p.org is kind of locking things down, because it is just supposed to be that role of trying it out, playing with it, learning it, not the end place to store your content. So they are like removing some of the features, like not being able to have access to all of the H5P content types or being able to embed. But another tool that I found that's been really useful is this Loomis Education. And Loomis is a free education tool that you can download onto your computer. And it's basically an H5P editor. And so you can, from your own desktop, you don't need a website or application or anything like that. You just have the Loomis application on your desktop, and you can view and edit H5P from this tool. And this one, it doesn't lock you out of anything. So this is a great place for like very basic. You have you and your students, they're creating their H5P here. And then, you could share it on Google Drive. That student can download it, add it to their Loomis to look at it. So it's kind of a rudimentary way of using it, but it's something that can be done if you're just trying to get started or just playing with it. So that one's a great tool to use. And as a side note, this presentation has links to the various tools that we'll talk about today. And I'll be sharing that presentation slide at the end in the chat after this. And so they'll be a great place for some of these things that we talk about. Kind of the next phase is looking at some of the paid options, because again, the platform H5P, it's open, but what I found the challenging part is the storage. So H5P, the same team that manages the .org site, they created a service, h5p.com, and it's there for you to store your H5P. So this is typically what what most can do is buy a license for h5p.com, store it, and then embed it into various websites. And for integrating in a lot of the learning management tools, Blackboard, Canvas, they do have an LTI or an external tool that you can use to integrate h5p.com into the LMS. But you do need the paid part to do that, right? The other paid options that I'm aware of is WordPress and Pressbook. They're both initially free websites, but if you pay for that paid tier, you can utilize some of the plugins created for those. So Idaho State just recently got a license to Pressbook, and we're able to create our open textbooks, and those have their own content bank similar to Moodle, where you can create your H5P and store it, and then you use it within the textbook. So one of the ideas that I'm playing with is the idea of students being part of that creation process of building out a textbook, but then they're using H5P to add interactive elements. I'm really inspired by David Wiley's textbook that he did in a similar fashion, the project management for instructional designers. Kind of has that similar concept of, assigning students to specific chapters in Pressbooks and then having them, write it out, and that becomes part of their experience, their learning experience. And then there's the third option, which is the integration option. So like with Moodle, the team that did H5P, there is a plugin that you can add for like versions 2.7 and above that allows you to have H5P as an activity that you can add, and then the H5P is kind of stored on the Moodle site. So that's another freemium platform to create H5P within the course, and the H5P is stored on Moodle. And then recently in Moodle version 3.9 and above, that's where you've got that content bank, the H5P embed button. So that's more integrated. So with Moodle, that's already built in to that version to utilize that platform. And just highlight this is when I was kind of mapping this out. So I've got my own Pressbook that I've tried to keep track of all of this information. And so in here I talk about, because we're a Moodle school, my focus is more Moodle, so I don't really talk about Blackboard or Canvas. But because this is open, if you're into that, you can definitely take this and build on it for those. But I tried to look at, different strategies on how to use H5P depending on, your version of Moodle, what you're allowed to do by your admin. Like the one that I like the most is at the course level, giving the students the permissions they need, kind of like an override, so that they can take those permissions and be able to create H5P within the course. But another workaround might be is you just have a secondary course in the LMS that's just the lab course, or you give students that editing role where they have access to it, and then they kind of build everything in the lab course, but then the grades and feedback are stored in the academic or live course. So yeah, this resource is here, and it just talks about for the Moodle permission side, there's 13 of those, and I list those out for you. And then the other option, because I was always inspired by this, because I've got to have a sister who teaches K-12 in Washington. They don't have an LMS. So it's like, if I want to help her with H5P, what's her options? So I started doing a lot of research and figuring out, how can I do this all for free without having to pay someone to store this? How can I manage this? So I started looking at self-hosting options. And lucky enough with GitHub, they have a platform called Github Pages, where you create a free account and you can use GitHub as your repository. And then from there, you can add your H5P and load it into the site. There's been some help. There's a helpful community out there that I was able to find that helps take, because with your H5P file, when you export it into its specialized zip, it's a .h5p file. And so most programs don't know what to do with that. So this GitHub repository that I found and that you can make a copy of allows you to take your H5P and put it into a format so that website can use it. So I talk about that here. Again, in that press book about some of the things you need. And here's a video, because I've only taken maybe one web design class in all of my college experience, and it was for my minor in graphic design. And so I'm definitely not like a website guru by any means. A lot of it's been self-taught. And so I've put together a video to give you, the essential information that you need to be able to self-host on GitHub and use your H5P. Because there are some of those scenarios where that's probably the best option if you want to keep that control, keep the costs down, and all that stuff for a free and open platform. So that's there in this, that's available as well. And part of this example is I'm currently wrapping up my master's degree in instructional technology and design. So I'm currently in a course talking about OER. So as part of this pilot of me trying to work out this idea, I have this blog that I've created on Weebly, and it allows me to, by using the self-hosting option, I'm able to then embed those activities on the GitHub page and reuse them in this site. So I can just come down to one of these posts. So here's one that's a personality quiz from H5P. And so students can interact with this, and then they'll be able to interact with it on a Weebly site, right? Or so if you're using Google Classrooms, you could take the link to this activity and put it in, or provide the link in the Google Classroom site. And yes, I will be providing the link to my presentation with all these resources in the chat, and try to make sure that it gets added to the Discord site as well. So the first question, or the other question I'm saying, so does data from H5P of student interactions get saved to Moodle Gradebook? There is a way you can do your H5Ps that way, where they're almost like they're standalone assignments, and that gets pushed. I haven't played with that piece of it because I usually use H5P as a formative assessment that's typically not graded, because again, they can do it unlimited times. And I know there is I've noticed some issues with that of I might get 100% one time, but if I try it again a second time, it might pull my lower score. So it can push to the gradebook, but I typically don't rely on the data piece. I just use it as activities for students to use and reuse, not really graded. It's more for their benefit of self-checking their understanding. So let me go back to, and then here's what the GitHub Pages looks like. Like I said, I'm not a web designer, so it's very simplistic. I've loaded up the H5P on here so I can click on this page. But now that it's here, I can take that link and paste it wherever I want it to, and people can enjoy my H5P activity. So I don't know, again, I'm laying down the groundwork. So there could be a class somewhere who goes through this whole process where each student has their own standalone website. But I mean, this is available for that type of content creation. And then I did notice that when I'm hosting it, some of the H5P features don't quite work, because right now I should be able to download it and embed from the activity itself. Because I'm self-hosting, some of those processes are broken. So I just included the HTML code that I need. And then once I put it where I need to, I can replace it with the proper URL. Again, very basic, but it gives me the power to store my own H5P and reuse it as needed. And then let's see. So that's really the H5P integration piece in the nutshell. If you're interested in self-hosting, again, if you have Moodle, like I feel like that's right now the best platform, just because it's core, but also, I mean, h5p.com if you are more interested in the data piece, I think h5p.com is going to be probably the best one for you to use, or using the integrated stuff in Moodle. So like I talked about, here are the different kind of a summary of those different active learning environments from, again, you've got the beginner h5p.org stuff, the paid stuff, and the integration stuff. So you can see that any process where you can become the creator, it's just transferring that role and giving it to students to be able to create it. And kind of the next topic that I have for mine is last summer, just before the pandemic really hit, I designed and created a course that relies on this process of where the students are creators. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of demo that, showcase some of the things happening in that course. So again, this is in Moodle, and I'm relying on that content bank that I showed you. And this is basically how it's set up. Is I've got a book at the first that talks about their learning outcomes, what they're going to be able to do, supplementary resources. And then I go through, oh, let's see, that's the video production. I need to come down to interactive graphic. So, because this is where they're really utilizing the H5P. And so here, using the book, because we're introducing them to H5P, I talk a little bit about it. I definitely want to give them the resources for self-hosting, because I want to make sure that what they're building in this course is something that they can reuse in their own classroom or use outside of. So I try to make sure that, you know, we want this content to be relevant. We don't want this content that they work so hard to create and have it be behind a password protected course that goes away after the semester's done, right? I want them to be able to reuse this content going forward. So that's why I've focused a lot of this time and energy on, you know, these different methods and what's the best way. And if you want to pay for h5p.com, if you don't, here are your options. And then I try and give them examples just so that they know kind of what to expect. So here's another one of Agamotto as an example. I also have the ADDIE model for them to read through. Just that, again, these are just examples for them to use. And then I also try to provide the tutorial stuff as well. So if they're coming to this at very first, I provide them so that they know how to set these up to begin with. So I do provide that help documentation that h5p.org provides. Because this is kind of designed for instructional technologists and designers, like that's part of it too, is H5P is a great platform because it has so much variety that students, even though the lessons stay the same, we're always talking about it in a new perspective or with a different H5P. But that's typically the foundation. So we talk about, you know, creating interactive graphic, and then we have them using it in more of a lesson format as their assessment. With the interactive environment, we get it more into the advanced of building a 360 virtual tour, or the branching scenario, having them try different technology to get to that point, right? And then kind of the capstone for this course is we provide them a secondary Moodle page with editing as a teacher role or unlisted teacher. And then they're able to have their own topic and they create their H5P and their other instructional materials. We try to make sure that they have, you know, outlined their outcomes, assessments, making sure everything's aligned as part of that practice experience as well. But again, in any environment, maybe if you're in a science class and you want your students to create or assign them different topics for that term, the water cycle, anything like that, I mean, you kind of let loose and have them design. And that way, one of the benefits of this too is your students are creating, and then you really, rather than this creation process being all on your shoulders to develop, design, implement stuff, you're having these students do it for you. And a lot of times from their different perspective, they might be able to create something better, or because it's H5P, you can easily modify it and make it something that best fits. So, I mean, you have that flexibility with it too. And I did provide, because some of the links that I'm sharing are to an actual Moodle course that's locked down. So I did provide videos to highlight this as well for later use. But then as part of that student pilot last summer and getting ready to teach it again this summer, I tried to pull up as much feedback and improve the course, but this was kind of the theme, trying to do something we haven't done before in that program. And I mean, the students themselves, they enjoyed it. They like that ability to have their own page to edit and create something. Granted, they all were instructional designers. So we were trying to give them some real world experience with that. But the other part of it too is, even though it was repetitive, again, because we were looking at it through different lenses, they were able to not be bored by it, right? Wasn't too repetitive for them. So those were some of the feedback and great highlights we've gotten. And I went through the presentation fairly quick, but here's the time for questions and comments on your phone if you want to scan the QR code. I will also copy the presentation into the chat for everyone. And we'll try and get this on the Discord site as well. But yeah, if there's questions that we don't answer today, you can always email me. This is a topic that I'm always excited about. So there's my email there, so you can reach me even after the conference for questions. The QR code. So Google Chrome, not too long ago, made it. I'm gonna adjust this. So in your URL, if you've updated your Chrome recently, you've got the QR button here. So that's how I created my QR codes now, is through the browser, download it and put it where I need it. So that's, yeah. And then, yeah, the rest of the time is for questions, comments.
There was a question asking for some resources about connecting it to the gradebook, and that was by Rana, and it looks like Ryan mentioned that you can connect it with SCORM, which probably for most people, they would need some resources and perhaps some technical support on that.
Yeah, I know SCORM a little bit, but yeah, I'll have to dig into that one some more and see what options there are, because I'm not familiar with SCORM. How do you export the H5P project from Loomis? So let me get that pulled up. So I'm going to start my Loomis editor. I'm going to open an existing one. And then, let's see, to remember how to do this one. Oh, here we go. So on Windows, it's File and then Export or Save As. I think we'll allow you to export it as a H5P file. And the .h5p file is just a specialized zip. So if you, for the self-hosting piece, if you just change it from .h5p to .zip, it will allow you to extract it to all the source files. And that's, like I said, for more of the self-hosting piece of it, where you do need to break it down further. The QR code trick again. So just any website in your browser, if you click the omnibar, I believe is what it's called, or the address bar, you've got the icon here. I don't know if I can make that any bigger, but then you click on it and it gives you the generated QR code where you can download it as, I believe, a PNG file. Perfect. Save as does the trick. But yeah, I'm super excited about H5P. It seems like when I do go to a lot of conferences, it's one that's talked a lot, but it isn't one that goes to the point of students, maybe because it's more of faculty getting more comfortable with it. But I have that feeling that your students can do it, you can do it. So I think there's just tons of fun and ideas. Again, in the course that I'm currently in, where we're managing our own blogs about OER, every week there's a create, and I'm always analyzing the content I'm reading and thinking, you know, how can I turn this into an interactive activity for the students to help them better understand this activity as I'm learning it, right? And I might get it wrong, but it's still the learning process, and that's why there's that community of students to collaborate with.
So Michael asked about accessibility challenges. He's heard that it has accessibility challenges.
Yeah, there are some H5P activities that aren't, and I believe h5p.org does highlight which ones are and which ones aren't very good as far as accessibility goes. And again, that could be different too. With viewing it is going to be one form of level of accessibility, right? But creating it might be another challenge as well.
I haven't looked at it in a while, but some time ago I did look at it. I was comparing it with the Canvas new quizzes, which also have some similar tools in it, similar question types. H5P had a really pretty extensive document on what was accessible, what wasn't, and what they were doing.
Yeah, I think if you even searched H5P and accessibility, there's the document right there. Oh, it moved things. But there we go. So, and I'll put that in the chat as well, because I know I don't have it in my presentation on the accessibility portion. And then with the Loomis education, let me just search for that one real quick. This one's actually another team that took the H5P code or the editor piece and made it into their own application. So you don't need an account with Loomis. You can just go to their site and download it. And they've got Windows, Mac, and Linux for you. And yeah, it's great for when I've used it, for offline work, because I don't need an internet connection to use it. So it's great for me if I'm doing more of the self-hosting. I'm creating it on my machine to better upload it into my self-hosted site. Whereas with Moodle or some of the other ones, it might make more sense to use it on those platforms where they provide you the editor. And then I don't mind getting out early. Like I said, this is a fairly quick presentation, but there's a lot of information to just dig more on your own with. But yeah, questions, I'm here as a resource about this stuff because I'm excited about it. Yeah, I started noticing H5P removing some of those features, and I'm just like, I know that's not the place to store things for long term. So yeah, Loomis is great for that online or self-hosted stuff without needing a server or repository. So Loomis is great. Yeah, I love the idea because I have fun creating these, so why not share that and give students the opportunity to do it. With Canvas, you are going to need h5p.com, and I do provide the how-to resources for the external or LTI. So using H5P with Canvas, so they put their documentation in there to set that. But I know you do need an h5p.com to integrate it with that tool.
So I'm talking away with my mic off. We did get one question that came to me. Can you log into your H5P account with Loomis?
They are separate. So Loomis is its completely own platform that utilizes the H5P editor. And then H5P.org is its own site for testing. They're not related in any way other than the creators of the creators of Loomis just used the open source code of the editor and added it into their own application. And I think Loomis has plans to expand so not only H5P, but other interactive content types. I think that's kind of what their plan is. So they'll have H5P, but other content types as well. So they are separate. And I do know that right now, when I've been following up on it, is because the Moodle integration, the content pane and that stuff, that is actually, I think, is developed by the Moodle team. And I know that there is some discussion that over time, the Moodle content bank might become different than what H5P is doing. I know H5P, they've said to use the LTI or the plugin, because that's what they have control over. So if there are changes, so just be aware of that too for long term, that there might be a fork in the road when it comes to that. And that's something I'm monitoring too, just to see where this might go with, because I mean the code's open, so people can make their own alternatives to it. Thank you everybody for being involved with us. Again, I'll just be here for questions as they come. But yeah, everyone else is free to go.
So I posted a link to the session eval. And while you're there, we're kind of getting towards the end of the conference. You might want to think about evaluating the whole conference, which you can do from the same page. So thank you all for attending. That was awesome. And Lance, and also just a little preview. We are going to have the award, what do we call it? We're going to have the Northwest Met, Northwest eLearn, ELK organizational speed dating, i.e. we're going to just have a little few words about each of our organizations, and the awards ceremony coming up at 11 Pacific. I guess that would be noon Mountain, and you're going to have to figure it out if you're in some other time zone. That was good. I think we had 66 or more participants. So I guess I can stop the recording too. Okay.